Good afternoon. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive, and we're here today to sign into law a significant piece of legislation passed unanimously by the Westchester County Board of Legislators that represents a major protection for tenants all across Westchester County. We're very proud to have with us a number of prominent advocates from various organizations that have talked about the need for tenants to have proper legal representation when they are in court in matters where they face eviction. And as I think most of us know, individuals, whatever their level of affluence is, should have eligibility for legal representation when they're in court on a criminal matter. But on civil matters, there is not an automatic guarantee of counsel. This legislation advances that representation in matters of civil issues that deal with housing, because housing is that essential. And we have with us here, and they'll be speaking in a few minutes, a number of individuals who've been strong advocates for this. We have Allison Lake, who's the Executive Director of the Westchester Children's Association. We have Rachel Chazen-Halprin, Esquire, who is the CEO of our Hudson Valley Legal Services organization, and we have many other members of advocacy groups that we will call on a little bit later for their commentary who are with us here today. We're also joined by members of the Westchester County Board of Legislators. We'll be hearing in a second from the chair, Vedat Gashi, from the immediate past chair, Catherine Borgia, who is the sponsor of this bill, and we're also very fortunate to be joined by the vice chair of the Board of Legislators, the Honorable Nancy Barr. We have with us as well Westchester County Legislators Tyree Woodson-Samuels, Legislator Damon Marr, Legislator Jewel Williams-Johnson, Legislator Catherine Parker, and Legislator James Nolan. And as other members join us, I'll make sure that we recognize them as well. This was a bipartisan, unanimous effort. The legislation was not simple. We're very fortunate that John Nona, our county attorney, with the help of the rest of his colleagues, Stacey Dolgen-Metz, his first deputy, did a job of working through all of those things that happen when you're preparing legislation to try to get it right. And we're very happy that it has happened, and I'm going to be happy to sign it into law in just a couple of seconds. The bill itself addresses a very simple need, and that is the need for housing. When we look at what is important in a person's life, food, and a host of other things, shelters is absolutely part of that. And I learned a long time ago, back in my 20s, when I had the opportunity to serve in the city of Mount Vernon as a very young guy, dealing with housing issues, just how critical the housing crisis is. And the crisis has not gotten any easier in the 45 years from that experience to where we are today. And we know that COVID has exacerbated all of the problems that we have already with housing and affordable housing. And then, of course, here in Westchester County, where we have a growing population, we also have a limited amount of growth in the housing units that are available, and particularly at affordable levels of housing. So questions of eviction become even more pointed. Those residents who are facing hardships and want to remain in their homes, we want to make sure we ease the burden on our social network of issues. Leonard Towns, our Commissioner of the Department of Social Services, is also with us. He'll speak to that issue in a second. I want to publicly thank the Board of Legislators for their leadership in this role. We often talk about what happens in Washington, D.C., or what doesn't happen in Washington, D.C., and we look at what happens in the state legislature, where there are complicated pieces of legislation that take time and energy and effort. This is a complicated piece of legislation with lots of different ramifications. And the Board of Legislators, in the aggregate, and then individuals, showed true leadership in taking a concept that we announced support for at the beginning and turning it into a piece of legislation that we believe we can administer here in Westchester County. This legislation will deal with the fact that in Westchester County courts at present, 93% of the landlords that have cases in landlord-tenant matters are represented by counsel. Only 7% of the tenants who are in those very same cases are represented by legal counsel. That is a great disproportion, and that disproportion has immediate outcomes in the cases and how they're resolved, and in the society that has to respond to the results of those cases. This legislation establishes an Office of Housing Counsel within the county's Department of Social Services to establish a countywide program that would provide access for legal services for income-eligible tenants and occupants. A person whose household income is at or below 300% of the federal poverty guidelines, or at 60% of the county average median income, who has legal standing, is in this covered proceedings. And those technicalities are very important and will be administered through this office under the direction, ultimately, of the Department of Social Services with the guidance and assistance of our able law department. The covered proceedings that we discuss include the eviction of an individual, challenges to rent increases based upon a landlord's failure to provide proper notice, maintaining or restoring a covered individual's occupancy of a residential rental premise, possession of a residential premise for the non-payment of rent or holdover, restoration or maintenance of essential services, and a proceeding which would result in the termination of tenancy, rental subsidy, or other rental assistance. These legal services provided to those individuals who are covered under this program is provided at no cost to the client, owing to their indigency and their level of income being unable to have private representation on their own. This is a groundbreaking measure in which the New York City has adopted and no other county in New York State has done. So in this regard, Westchester once again shows our willingness to lead. We recognize that there is a managerial challenge ahead of us. We understand that there is a cost control element ahead of us, and we go into this understanding that those things are things that we have to manage properly if we want to deliver the proper service, but at the same time, do so in a responsible way. I'd like to invite a number of individuals to speak, to share their points of view on this. And first, I'll begin with the Chair of the Board of Legislators, the Honorable Vedat Ghazi. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you again, County Executive. It's my honor to be here. Obviously, as was mentioned, this is a big and meaningful step for the residents of Westchester. It's not perfect. There's more we could have wanted, but frankly, it is such a great thing for so many people in Westchester that I'm excited to be a part of it. Here in the Board of Legislators, we're always looking for ways that we can make the lives of the residents better, and I think this is a meaningful way that we do that. I want to thank, again, the sponsor of this bill, Catherine Borgia, as previous chair, and all of my colleagues who worked hard not only to pass this bill, but to make it better. And again, we have a challenge ahead of us to make sure we implement it and to follow through. But proud to be here as part of this great effort. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's the Chair of the Board of Legislators, Vedat Ghazi. The immediate past Chair of the Board of Legislators, Catherine Borgia, was the sponsor of this bill, and sponsors usually have the heavy lifting of trying to negotiate out differences of opinion. And although we came to a unanimous end result on the Board of Legislators, it is never that simple. Every member has their own opinions, and those opinions have to be incorporated into the discussion and have to be respected even when they're in diametric opposition to each other. So to get this to a final product through her leadership and working through her colleagues on the board, the vice chair and acting chair for a bit, Nancy Barr, that was a significant role of leadership. So I give you legislator Catherine Borgia.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. County Executive. So this piece of legislation, like many pieces of legislation, came to us through advocates. They came to us with the idea. We wrestled with it for a while. Right before the pandemic, I spent some time in local courts to see how housing cases played out. And it was obvious that people who were represented did much, much, much better than people who were unrepresented. So I was sold on the idea from the beginning. You might have seen me wink at the Deputy County Executive because honestly, the biggest arguments we had about this piece of legislation were with him. But, but that is because of the diligence of making something that actually will work for the people of Westchester, as the chair said. We are very proud of this piece of legislation. I myself, due to change in life circumstances, I think I'm probably one of the only people on the county board who do rent. So I have a personal experience about some of the vulnerabilities that renters do face. And I really also want to thank, I know he's not here today, he's not with us because he is ill. I want to thank Marcelo Figueroa, who really helped us make this the best piece of legislation. We think this is better than the New York City legislation, and we want all the other counties, or several other counties in New York State to adopt it so that the state adopts it. So thank you to everyone who was part of this. It really was a wonderful effort, and I think we all have a lot to be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Legislator Catherine Borgia. Legislators legislate and executives direct and sign, and then somebody has to administer this legislation, this bill. And it falls to the capable hands of Leonard Towns, who's our commissioner of the Department of Social Services, and his team. This is the largest department of county government. It is the most complicated department of county government. It deals with people in the worst parts of their life, when there is stress and poverty and other issues that are just holistically very traumatizing for people. But during his tenure as head of the department, Leonard has tried to do things to change and reform the department in a positive direction. He's got a strong team around him, and that's why we feel comfortable giving him this responsibility. Commissioner Leonard Towns.
Thank you, George. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to say this is a good day. This is a very, very good day. There's been a lot of talk about equity throughout the nation over the past several years, and it's time things need to be done about it. And I think the signing of this bill into law represents a major step toward bringing about equity within the courts. People who are in this situation, families, individuals, are struggling to make ends meet. And so you have to step back sometimes and think about the trauma families are experiencing. They're having a hard time to make it day to day, and then the thought of facing the justice system alone without anyone can be very challenging, very traumatizing on individuals and on families. But with the creation of this Office of Housing Counsel, families will no longer have to stand alone. They'll be supported, they'll be encouraged, and they'll have somewhere to go when they're facing those challenges and struggles. So I think I want to thank everyone who was behind pushing this, because it's a major piece of legislation, and I think we need to understand there is a need out there, and we have to pay attention to that need in Westchester County. So I just really want to thank George, and the Board of Legislators for really coming together on this and taking positive steps toward bringing about change. And we will continue to focus on bringing about change and equality throughout Westchester County. So I just want to thank you all for being here and for all your support. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for your leadership. I've often said in some settings about how much we rely on those individuals that are outside of county government to help us frame the things that we have to do. And I talk about the private sector and where we turn to expertise in construction and in a host of other different areas. We bid projects out when we know that we don't have the in-house experience to be able to do a particular type of work. And we know that the private sector can provide those functions at a fee, obviously, but can do it better than we can do it. And the same is true of not-for-profits. I've said that many times because there are organizations that are structured around delivery of a service that is best done by those who are closest to the people and the issues at hand. And to this next step, I want to be able to recognize some of those individuals who have been involved both in the advocacy for this, coming out of their service and the organization they're in, dealing with people who face these problems every day. First person I'd like to invite to speak is Allison Lake, the Executive Director of the Westchester Children's Association, a great partner in county government and an advocate in county government, which means truth to power, even whether we do it right or wrong. Allison.
Thank you. Thank you so much, County Exec. I want to thank the County Executive and the Board of Legislators really for passing this very important piece of legislation. Westchester Children's Association is a multi-issue children's advocacy organization, and we've been in the realm of looking at child homelessness in the county here for several years. In fact, we know that the majority of children, as defined by the Department of Education, that are homeless find themselves in overcrowded housing, doubled and tripled up. Approximately 2,100 children in Westchester, if you use that definition, are homeless. A piece of legislation like this will certainly impact the lives of some of those families and make their possibility to have more permanent, secure housing for their children and their families. We know from the research that when children are securely housed, they have better education outcomes, better social and emotional and mental health outcomes, and just a better outlook for their future. And so for us as child advocates, this piece of legislation is tremendously important in giving families that solid piece of, as we said, housing, food, all of that is the basics that families need. It's really timely, in a sense, that we're signing this today. Over the last month, Westchester Children's Association has been working in partnership with the legal services of the Hudson Valley and some of their great staff who helped us train volunteers as we are embarking on an eviction court watching program. So this is a great kickoff to that. We look forward to seeing what happens on the front line. As part of our advocacy, we base it on data, we base it on the information that we have. So we are looking forward to having our volunteers that have been trained to go in and see what really happens, particularly for families with young children. As I said, that is one of our major concerns. And as we know, the devil is always in the details. And so I know there's still work to be done. There's things that didn't happen in this initial piece of legislation that perhaps all of us want to work towards improving. So we certainly hope that we can work in partnership, share the information that we learn from our court eviction program with everyone here, with the county, with the lawyers, with the other nonprofits, to really make this benefit to as many families here in Westchester as possible. And I thank you for inviting me here today and excited for the partnership. Thank you.
Next up, I'm going to invite a person who is on the firing lines of providing legal services to people in need of those services. Rachel Chazen-Halperin has taken on the responsibilities of CEO of the organization that serves not just Westchester County, but the Hudson Valley, Legal Services of the Hudson Valley. And she's done an excellent job, and she's taken over from a friend of mine who's done an excellent job over her tenure, Barbara Finkelstein, who's with us here. Barbara and I had a conversation about this once a long time ago, and I think I don't want to date you. I'm clearly not young, but it took time and circumstances for us to be in a position of authority to be able to do these things. And Rachel now has shown that providing the service is certainly possible, and now as we broaden the scope of it, we rely on her and people like her, Jason Mays and others in this room, who can really help us create the end result. And that end result is what we're doing this all for. So, Rachel, if you join us, please.
So this is such a proud day for us and for the advocates in the room, and I just, again, want to thank the county executive and the Board of Legislators for its thoughtful approach to addressing homelessness and the housing crisis in Westchester by recognizing the effectiveness of providing counsel to tenants facing eviction. I also want to recognize the many members of the Westchester Right to Counsel Coalition who advocated for years tenaciously for this piece of legislation. They are an amazing group of people who never gave up, and it's such a proud day for all of them. We are grateful for the county's bold leadership for passing and signing this bill, and we look forward to working collaboratively with them on its implementation. This monumental piece of legislation puts Westchester in a growing category of progressive jurisdictions, but it is the first county and only county so far across the country that are implementing legislative measures to provide access to counsel to tenants who are at risk of losing the fundamental right of housing. As in other jurisdictions with similar legislation, it is likely that Westchester will see a decrease in evictions, a decrease in eviction filings, an improvement in housing conditions, and stabilization of families and communities. This legislation is needed now more than ever. Westchester is on course to have over 8,000 new eviction cases filed this year alone. Housing instability is the #1 reason people come to our agency seeking services. An attorney can ensure that a tenant's rights and defenses are asserted, that landlords maintain their apartments in habitable conditions, and that tenants are connected to financial assistance when they suffer financial hardship. In sum, this is an incredible bill and an amazing opportunity to make real change in the lives of tenants and communities in Westchester, and we are so thankful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I do want to recognize that we have a number of people from the county government who are here, who are critical parts of what happens both in the legislative branch and in the executive branch. I may miss people because I'm doing it without benefit of the list, but I see from the legislative staff of the Board of Legislators, Marion Bateman is with us here, Joy Haber is here, we have John Filiberti, Debbie Friedman. I know I'm missing a few more. Help me out, somebody. But In any event, and then from the executive branch, Ellen Hendricks is with us, our director of research. Steve Bass, our director of intergovernmental services, is with us here. Our acting commissioner of the Department of Planning. She and I once had a conversation a long time ago about these issues too, back in our Portchester timeframe. Blanca Lopez. And then, of course, many people of longstanding. Joe Liberti is giving us education in the Mamaroneck High School world about how young people can see government. And hopefully, Joe, this is one of those examples when government actually works and accomplishes something that we think is important. I do want to open it up to at least a couple of people if they'd like to make a few comments. I'm going to finger at least two of them out. I've mentioned the aforementioned Barbara Finkelstein and my friend of longstanding Dennis Hanratty. Dennis and I go back to our youth in Mount Vernon. I'm always fond of saying that he was a pitcher in youth baseball. He struck me out 3 times in a game. I remember that, but I also remember I got a single off of him. He seems to forget that. But I think 3 strikeouts and a single gave him the advantage that day. But Dennis with Mount Vernon United Tenants has been a person that I have relied on during my legislative years. I would call him up routinely and say, Dennis, I have this set of circumstances. What should a legislator, what should I do to help? And Dennis understood the dynamics of people who were poor and what they were suffering through. And he did it there, as Jorandi Martinez does in Mamaroneck and the Community Resource Center, and so many of you do in other contexts. And of course, Barbara, your leadership. If you'd like to share some thoughts, I want to invite any of those folks to please come up here. Just identify yourself and then share whatever your thoughts are. If you can come up this way, we should work it out. Barbara?
Can I give you a hug?
Absolutely. I'll take it.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.
And thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Catherine. Hi, everyone. I'm Barbara Finkelstein. I am currently the co-chair of the Westchester County Right to Counsel Coalition with Jason Mays, who's over there. He is the director of litigation at Hudson Valley Justice Center, which was created as a subsidiary of Legal Services of the Hudson Valley to expand leadership, to expand representation to anyone in the county who needed representation. When we formed the Westchester Right to Counsel Coalition, we did it really wanting to expand our scope and to include as many people as possible in the struggle to provide representation to tenants who were facing evictions. I have worked with George, I've worked with Ken, I've worked with Catherine, I've worked with all the board members and all the advocates for over 25 years. Trying to provide representation to tenants, and it really started in the Andy Spano administration, little by little by little. But it really took George's leadership to put all this together with the County Board of Legislators, and as others have said, this is the only county in the country that has put together this kind of legislation, and it is an expansive legislation. It is broader than the legislation in New York City, and I really look forward to working with the executive branch, with the legislative branch, and continuing with the advocates to be able to make sure that this is the best legislation possible, and if possible, to get the state to pass legislation that will help everyone throughout the state. So thank you all again, and it's really great to be here.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, George.
Dennis?
Thank you, George. Thank you, legislators here in the room. My name is Dennis Hanratty. I'm the executive director of Mount Vernon United Tenants. And while George says I'm helpful in a lot of ways, I'm not an attorney, even though a lot of the landlord attorneys in Mount Vernon and elsewhere always accuse me of practicing law without a license, because we beat them on a regular basis. But I feel really inadequate most times because people come to my office on a regular basis, 2 or 3 or 4 clients they've got to go to court. And we're not attorneys at Mount Vernon United Tenants. I regularly brief people about what's going to happen and all. But there's this tremendous imbalance that George mentioned. 93% of landlords are represented, 7% of tenants are. That's just incredible. Our job is to start even that relationship out. Let the tenants have the same rights as landlords have. It's a very, very intimidating process. We go into court. I'm glad, Catherine, you went there. You see how it's bullying. In the hallway, we try to negotiate sometimes, but you see the landlord attorneys talk over the tenants. They don't let them get the word in edgewise, and they get just bullied in court. It's an intimidating process. You're down there, the judge is in a black robe up on top, and they're looking down at you, and the landlord's attorneys are always bullying them, speaking over them, not letting them assert their rights even if they know what they are. So that's why it's essential that people have the proper legal representation in court. We're committed to working on it. We've been working on this for God knows how long. We're committed to working with the Board of Legislators and the state, especially, as Barbara said. We'd like to get the state to pass this because it takes some of the economic heat off the county there. So our organization, Mount Vernon United Tenants, is willing to work with anybody on making this happen. And I want to thank the board and George for all the work they've done. And thank all the people in the audience for their help. Thank you.
Randy.
I want to thank so much for the leadership of this county on behalf of the Community Resource Center and our partners at Okra in the Mamaroneck High School. What we stand for is empowering and advocating for the immigrant community of Westchester. And as Dennis said, it is so intimidating for people to defend their rights, especially if they are mixed status, undocumented, low income, new families in this community, but they pay their rent and they are maybe struggling and deserve so much to have their rights heard. And we at Community Resource Center are committed to educating our community about their rights. So you can count on us to really share with our families, our community, that they have these rights, that this happened in Westchester, and we're committed to making it happen statewide. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you. I want to thank particularly the leadership of Ken Jenkins, our Deputy County Executive. There isn't a decision that isn't made by this county government that Ken isn't an intrinsic part of. I rely on his leadership, and we formed a strong partnership, not just the two of us, but with this executive team, working with the Board of Legislators, and working with local governments, and working with the state legislative delegation as well. And as we say, in the nature of this business, there is conflict. That is what democracy is. But to get to an end product that we can all agree upon and live with and then try to implement is important. And Ken, I want to thank you for your leadership on this as well. Thank you. Very important. So before I sign the bill, just a couple of closing thoughts, and then we'll have an opportunity to just be with each other socially for a little bit. I mentioned my prior experience involved in housing in the city of Mount Vernon when I lived there, and I was employed by the Department of Planning. But I had another experience almost simultaneously to that, and I was in my mid-20s. There was a problem in the apartment building I lived in, Prospect Avenue. The Carriage House still exists today, a beautiful apartment building, 1 block from the train station, transit-oriented development. And the landlord of that day was having some financial problems and didn't pay the Con Edison bill. And in a couple of days, we're going to be dedicating a building which the county owns on behalf of our friend Reggie Lafayette. But that building in those days was the headquarters for Con Edison in Westchester County. And we were in a situation where Con Edison was going to shut off utilities for all of the tenants because the landlord had a major problem. And we had a tenant meeting without benefit of a tenant organization. It was one of those meetings, we've all been in them, where everybody's talking over each other and yelling and different ideas. And I was young, much younger than most of the other tenants, but I had some sense that there had to be rationality out of this cacophony of voices. And so I kind of spoke up a little loudly, and I hadn't been in the building all that long. Maybe I'd lived there about a year. And out of that came some conversations and decisions. And the minute you speak up in a meeting like that, you get designated as a spokesperson. So I had to meet with the Con Edison leadership of that day. I met with the landlord. That was not a pleasant meeting. But what I found out, with the knowledge that I did not have because I was not a lawyer, that we could petition a court and have money set aside in an escrow account to cover the utility costs. And by doing that, Con Edison would not shut off our utilities, and the immediate problem was pushed off, and then the landlord ultimately sold the building to somebody else who came in, and the crisis was averted. But what I learned from that experience is what I didn't know. And had I not had the benefit of a woman named Judy Studebaker, who was with Legal Services of that day in the Mount Vernon City Hall. She's now actually a neighbor of mine where I live now in Rye. I would not have had the knowledge to know how to do that. And that little experience taught me something when Barbara and I had that conversation all that time ago, and when I kind of talked to Blanca during her HDSW days, and it made me understand that some entity needed to step into this breach. The hard work on this legislation belongs to the Board of Legislators. It belongs to the Department of Law. It belongs to the advocates. But understanding that we had to do something was something that I knew a long time ago, and only now in this context did I have the authority to be able to say, yes, let's go forward. Because even the Board of Legislators with a hostile administration would have difficulty accomplishing these things. And when you look at the amalgam of things over time, when you look at free buses, when you look at converting a bus fleet from diesel to electric, when you look at an initiative to put money into maternal health outcomes for women of color, when you look at raising the age of tobacco before other jurisdictions did, when you look at creating mental health crisis response teams, when you look at fixing assets that are deteriorated like Memorial Field or building a new New Rochelle family court on issue after issue after issue, what we have done is what was simply needed to be done at that time. It's been done by the Board of Legislators, by this administration. We've done it bipartisanly. We've done it with a minimum of rancor. And we've done it because, simply put, it's the right thing to do. And, I've always said to my friends, I don't believe in legacy. I don't believe you go naming things after people, except I do it for other people. I think the legacy is if you know that during our tenure, and I say this to my friends in the Board of Legislators, that we know inside that we had authority for this period of time, and we used it wisely. We used it to do things that needed to be done, and we did that. And that is the gratitude at the end of the day. It's electorally, my friends are going to run in future races, but we know that the advocates had a listening ear, we responded to it, and now hopefully we can implement it in a way that's productive. And now I intend to sign this into law.
Legislators.
Yes, please, members of the legislature, come on up. Just remember, there's 17 county legislators. If this were the House of Representatives, there'd be 435 people trying to crowd around this microphone. Okay. We have with us a committee report that's been submitted by the Committee on Housing and the Committee on Legislation, signed by the respective chairs and the members advancing this bill. This is Local Law 262 of 2022, with all of the various provisions that have been identified. And we have a certification from the clerk of the County Board of Legislators, Sunday Vanderberg. Get everybody up here you need to. There's only so much rev in the engine I got left. No more jokes today. I did my joke for the day. Passed by the Board of Legislators in the County of Westchester by 17 votes for and 0 votes against on the 15th day of May. And I'm signing this actually a couple of days ago to make sure that it's perfectly legal in the month of May. And I guess I should do this with every single pen. You'd think by now I'd know how to do this, right? Lyndon Johnson, I remember being very good at this when I was a kid. By my signature as Westchester County Executive, the item is now law. On behalf of the legal community, Rachel, will you please accept one? Allison, on behalf of the advocacy community, would you accept one? Catherine Borgia, as the sponsor of the bill, we'd appreciate if you'd accept one. And Barbara, out of long-term friendship and the original conversation. Thank you. May that be. And as I say, every time I do one of these things, let's do this again. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.